Situational awareness, it's as easy as paying attention, right? And yet every single day, you and I can turn on the news and hear about a police officer that's been shot, or somebody who's been robbed, raped, assaulted, kidnapped, trafficked. Or we could talk to our neighbors and hear about how somebody's home got broken into, or how they got assaulted at the local grocery store. Were they all not paying attention? Look, I get it. Situational awareness is a big part of our safety protocol. But for the people who are actually applying situational awareness into their everyday life, they have a deeper understanding of how it goes, there's a strategy, and then they develop that particular skill set. And that's what we're going to talk about today. You're welcome to skip this episode if you think you already have it down, but I would love for you guys to be a part of the conversation, part of the discussion, and let's go through a few different things and make sure that you're not leaving your own personal safety up to a gamble. All right, welcome to episode 002 of the S2 Everything Self-Defense and Beyond series. I'm your host, Nik Farooqui, and today's episode is titled The World Around You. Today, we're going to be talking about a variety of different aspects of awareness and how it applies to your life. We're going to go through some geek level kind of stuff. I'm going to give you guys some different exercises that you can work on. Some of it gets a little bit dark, but it's well worth doing. And I'll give you guys some pro tips along the way that you guys can start doing for yourselves for your own personal safety. So, look, here's the deal. I get it. Awareness is a huge component of our overall safety protocol. Whether you're an armed citizen, whether you're not, whether you're a martial arts person, whether you're not, every single person should be understanding and focusing a little bit on proper awareness, what it means, and how to utilize that in their lives. Now, it's not just self-defense. This applies to business, this applies to your overall safety, this applies to your transit, going to work, driving around, any of those types of things, right? So awareness is a critical component. I have a problem with the term awareness. It's commonly used. Most of the time, there's not a whole lot of good information that's associated to it. It's almost a catchphrase, almost a fashionable thing to say. So in today's episode, I want to go into a deeper dive and give you some practical information on how to apply awareness, what it actually means. And I think this is going to be a pretty interesting episode. Let's start off first by talking a little bit about where we are as a society, okay? I think that as a society, we've become a little bit complacent, a little bit comfortable. And the reason for that is it's a great time to be alive. I mean, we have technology in everything, right? Cars are safer, roads are safer, our workplaces are safer. We have all kinds of connectivity at in the palm of our hands via cell phone, right? I can get information in real time. I can connect with anybody from across the globe instantly. And that's taking a toll on us to a certain degree. Now, I've gotten the chance to travel through some third world countries as well. People see things differently over there. They're much more in tune. They're a little bit more hip to the game. They're much more aware. They're looking for the hustle. They're looking for somebody who might be trying to harm them. They're looking for an opportunity, any of those kinds of things, right? And so what happens is, because we have so much connectivity, we have so much technology, we have so much power in the palm of our hands via this guy right here, the cell phone, that oftentimes we're eyes down. Our focus is somewhere else. And I think that's taken a toll on us, especially when it comes to the aspect of awareness and personal safety. So today we're going to be going through a variety of different things here. So let me first define, or at least change the term awareness. To me, for those of you guys who've spent any time with me or had some good conversations, I don't really use the term awareness. I'll be using it today because it's common nomenclature. But I tend to use the term cognitively available. Okay? Meaning mental readiness, all right? I want you guys engaged in a mental way. Awareness, what does that actually mean? It kind of sounds soft, but when we say something that cognitively available, that means your brain is engaged, it's ready to be a part of whatever circumstances are right in front of us, right? And so I tend to use a little bit different terminology, but for this episode, we'll stick to awareness for the most part, because again, it's a term that everybody understands. If you've spent a little bit of time with me, or have come to any of my training courses or classes or seminar, I will normally break down awareness into three different facets, okay? And so I'll kind of go through these first with you guys. First thing that I say is environmental awareness. And it's just that. What's happening in the environment? What's the lighting conditions like? What's the footing conditions like, meaning the ground? Is it snow? Is it gravel? Is it ice? Is it rain? Is it sand? Is it grass? It matters, right? Because your footing on concrete is not the same as your footing on wet grass. So we have to be aware of the environment itself, okay? And in that awareness of the environment, we also have to take a look at potential improvised resources. How can I make light? How can I make something that I can use for a barricade? How can I find a weapon if I don't already have one on me or if I can't access mine? And so all of these things are important aspects that we have to take a look at every single day. I'll give you another example of that. If you guys are driving and today might be a 40-degree, clear, sunny day, tomorrow might be -20 and 6 inches of snow. The environment has a direct impact on your daily behavior. And so environmental awareness is something that we constantly have to visit, okay? The second one is situational awareness. And when I talk about situational awareness, what I'm really talking about is where everything is in the moment and how it's moving, okay? Is there a lot of people? Is there not a lot of people? What's the overall feeling of the environment and at least where I'm at, the circumstances? Does this feel like a pretty safe place? Is this a highly secured facility? Any of these types of things, right? And inside of that, what you're actually looking for is any kind of red flag or any kind of indication that something's out of place, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that something bad's about to happen. It's just a cue, right? It's a clue that brings us to a little bit higher alertness, all right? And so situational awareness is really just kind of dynamic, and I want you to keep something else in mind. It changes every second. If you guys are walking through the mall, let's just say, your situation is that you're walking through, you have 10 people who are oncoming, right? 30 seconds later, you've passed them and you have 10 people who are coming from your right side. And then you pass them, and then maybe the power goes out because you have a lightning storm goes on or something like. And so these things change second by second, and so it's really important to be mentally engaged with what's happening. Okay. And then the third version is, or the third aspect, I should say, is what I call self-awareness. And this has some different stages as we move along, but it's all about you. First and foremost, what is your capability and what are your vulnerabilities? Okay, we talked a little bit about this in the last episode, where you have to understand what your limitations are, what your strong sides are, what your actual skill levels are, what makes you a target, these kinds of things, right? So there's self-awareness, and not just overall what your capabilities are, what are your capabilities right now? I'll give you an example of this. A couple different examples. One example is that, look, all of you guys pretty much know that I'm a martial arts guy most of my life, right? I started off as a young kid, went into a bunch of different striking arts and traditional arts. As a teenager, I got involved into JKD, Kali. That's my core of my martial arts. And later on in my 20s, I got involved with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a purple belt in Jiu-Jitsu. And so I have a pretty good competency of overall self-defense and martial arts, right? Plus the firearm side of things. And, last week I threw my back out. My ability to grapple with somebody today is not reflective of my overall capability, right? Overall, I can get on the ground with somebody, navigate the floor, work my way back up to my feet pretty well. I'm not talking like in a IBJJF kind of a thing where we're competing, where I'm not going to go up against a brown belt or a black belt. I will, just not going to fare so well. I'm talking about just an everyday self-defense encounter. I can navigate the floor just fine, except when I have a back injury, which is going to prevent me from doing particular types of positions or being able to sustain weight or pressure from somebody, right? Because I have an injury that's going to limit me from performing to my full capacity. And so it's not just about your capabilities, but it's at your capabilities at the current moment. I'll give you a different example. Let's just say that you're an amazing concealed carry practitioner, right? You're at the range all the time, you take classes all the time, and you're just a shooter, okay? I mean, you can hit a dime from 100 yards out with a pistol, let's just say. And then you go into a building that does not allow you to have your firearm. Okay? Your capabilities have now changed. Doesn't matter how good of a shooter you are, but the environment has changed, the situation has changed, and now circumstances now dictate what your limitations are. And so these are things that we constantly have to calculate in our head. A lot of times self-awareness alone is what prevents me from going into certain places or doing certain things, because I know that, hey, I might be in greater risk for being there, all right? And so I have to do a little bit of a risk versus reward analysis. So that's kind of the way I tend to break down the three types of awareness. Environmental awareness, again, just knowing what's around me, lighting conditions, flooring conditions, weather, that kind of stuff. And then we have the situational awareness, which is the dynamics of the environment itself, right? What's happening, what's not happening, and trying to find things that just simply don't fit, or at least give me some indication that there might be a problem. And then there's self-awareness, right? What are my capabilities overall? What are my capabilities right now? And then obviously, what are my vulnerabilities or limitations? And so that's the way I tend to look at things right off of the bat, okay? Now, when we talk about awareness, you know, and I kind of define this for you guys as just being mentally engaged, right? Mental readiness, cognitively available. You know, there's a big difference when we say look at something and observe something. And we have to make that delineation. Look is just kind of, I can kind of see it. It's just knowing that it's there. Observing something is actually trying to gather data. It has much more intent. It's much more deliberate. It's much more purposeful, observing, okay? And so I think one of the first things that we have to get past is that we have to get past the look mindset or the look behavior and start getting into the observe behavior. What am I observing for? I just went through that, right? I'm observing the environment, I'm observing the situation, and I'm observing myself at all points in time. And this is a constant cycle. It's not a one-time snapshot. Life is a video, not a picture. And so every second, things change, things evolve. Things were fine a second ago, but they're not fine right now. And, you know, I'll give you kind of a personal note. Right now, I have a whole bunch of things going on, right? I have my laptop going on here with the notes. We have the camera going on over here. I got my audio device. I'm engaging in this conversation with you guys. I'm sitting at the, lobby area for our office building. And so there's a bunch of things happening. And yet, at the same time, aside from observing where all these things are at, I'm also observing the staircase that's over there that gets me out, the second staircase that gets me out over there. I'm listening for the elevator shaft, the noise that it makes for it going up and down to see who's coming in, who's not coming in. It's Sunday evening where I'm at right now at the time of this filming. And so, there's not a whole lot of people at the office, but there are a few people. So it's a constant observation. At any given point in time, somebody can come through that elevator, right? At any point in time, somebody can come to that staircase. At any point in time, somebody can come out of the restroom area. I have to be able to observe. And so not only am I looking at the environment, I'm looking at the situation, and I'm also looking at myself. And I think that that's a great place to kind of start thinking about this. So, essentially, when we talk about awareness and observing, there's a process. What is that process? Well, I don't want to get into the whole medical aspect of things, not even that I would know it, just a few different terms that enough to get me into trouble. But essentially what's happening is our minds are taking in information, right? And that's millions of synaptic processes happening at the same time. Sound, air, temperature, size of something, distance of something, colors, all these different things are going through our brain instantly, and we're processing that, right? When we are observing, we are applying a higher amount of resources to actually gather that information. When we're looking, what we're actually doing is discarding information, okay? And so there's some selection going on, right? So we select identifying factors that we might find relevant while we're pitching the rest of it out. And the more we learn how to discard, the more we've done that on a day in, day out basis, we're training ourselves to actually ignore information, okay? So it becomes kind of a learned subconscious behavior to constantly just discard or just dismiss stuff. Because we're looking, we may not be observing. The mind and body, in my opinion, tend to want to perform at the least strenuous level, right? We tend to not want to overexert ourselves. We want to keep as much of our resources for as long period as a time as we possibly can, which means that instead of applying and engaging mentally, emotionally, physically, we tend to discard, like I said, or dismiss information. We're almost lazy in that sense until something alerts us, all right? And then usually it goes from 0 to 100 miles an hour in an instant, depending on the situation, okay? So there's a few things that I want to point out about that particular thing. First and foremost, as you spend more time observing and less time looking, all right, so we're not training ourselves to discard information, we're training ourselves to actually retain information. You're gonna find out that by habit, it becomes easier and easier and easier. So if you were just an oblivious person going through the world right now, and tomorrow you decided that, hey, I'm gonna be extremely aware, right? I wanna start working on this thing for my own personal safety. At first, it's gonna wreak havoc on you. It's gonna be exhausting mentally and emotionally or physically. But the more you do it, the more it becomes a part of your daily habit. And so the brain starts to perform that way, and it becomes much more efficient as you move along. It's just like any new habit. If you don't run or if you don't exercise, and then tomorrow you hit the gym and you try to run 1 mile, well, 1 mile will seem like an eternity. You do that for every single day for a month, and a month later, 1 mile is just barely a warm-up, right? And your body's not working as hard. So we can condition ourselves to be more observant and less dismissive, all right? And again, that's just a conscious effort to make that happen, where it's a conscious effort to develop a subconscious behavior, okay? Conscious effort to develop a subconscious behavior. Okay, so there's a few things that I think you can study to help you improve on awareness. First one that I'll point out is the OODA loop, O-O-D-A, all right? And the true name for it is the Boyd cycle. OODA, observe, orient, decide, and then act. And then the word loop, because it's a constant cycle, right? Observe, orient, decide, and act. Okay, and I want you guys to look this up. Colonel Boyd comes from the United States Air Force, and when he developed this, he was working on training and development of fighter pilots. And our goal for him was he wanted to improve their dogfighting ability, right? So air-to-air combat. And the way he was doing that was, he said, I need to have faster decision making, but more important than faster decision making, I want to raise the overall situational awareness of my pilots. Because if they have a greater range of situational awareness than their enemy, then we can now interrupt the enemy's OODA loop, their situational awareness, by making changes right off of the bat. Okay, and so he wanted to win by not only a faster decision-making process, but also by having more awareness of what's going around, so that way he can interrupt or influence those circumstances. So that's where the OODA loop comes from. I want you guys to do a little bit of research on that. The second one that I want you to study is what we call the theoretical model. Okay, the theoretical model. And by the way, I'll put all these notes down in the description below so you guys can refer back to it in case you guys can't write it down right now, but it will be in the description. The theoretical model is kind of like the granddaddy. It's a very wide kind of a framework, right? It's much more expansive, kind of a holistic approach to understanding what situational awareness looks like. But essentially, it brings in some different points here. First one it talks about is objects. Okay, and an object is the awareness of an object in the world and their current state. Okay, so if I put my coffee here, I can observe that that coffee is here, that it's not moving, it's not tipping over, any of that stuff, right? So I'm observing an object in the world, in time and space, okay, and what its current state is. Okay. The second note that the theoretical model brings in is what they call frames. Frames is an awareness of what kind of situation is going on ongoing, okay? So essentially it's kind of like if I was gonna say, take a video of this coffee cup, okay? Well, you're gonna get this entire idea. Well, we got the lights turning on in the city of Dallas right now. It's probably nighttime, Nik's talking. You know, there might be some people that are walking around over here. And so what you're looking at is an ongoing kind of a thing, almost a video style snapshot, okay? The third aspect of the theoretical model is what we call implications, okay? Implications is awareness of the object within the frame, okay? So we have this video that's going on. You're watching this movie of life playing out in front of you, and now you could take a look at it, be like, oh, I could see the chair. I see where that's happening. Oh, I see that car that's driving by. Oh, I see the people who are crossing the street. You get it? And so you have this hierarchy of how to observe things, right? First, look at an object. Second, look at how that object fits into everything else. And third, see what's how that object fits inside of all that movement. Like if I brought an elephant into here, into this video, you're gonna be like, well, the video makes sense. He's in an office building, he's got a camera going on, he's working off his laptop, that kind of stuff. Where the hell does that elephant come from? Okay, and so what are the implications of that object? And then the fourth one is what they call event horizon. Okay, the event horizon is an awareness of events in time and space. Okay, and by understanding those moments that have already passed by, we can then make predictions on what is upcoming. If you and I were outside and I was taking a look at traffic going by and we saw a red car at the stoplight, okay? The light turns green. The car is now coming towards us. Okay? So now we have an understanding of all these events, right? The car is in place, there's a stoplight that's going on, the light turns green, the car starts to creep forward, it's coming towards us. We can now predict that any moment that the car is going to pass us, okay? And so that's called event horizon, right? How are things played out already for known circumstances? Based off of known circumstances, what is the probability or what the outlook of that particular event is going to look like, right? So we can predict what should be, okay? Okay, so that's what we call the theoretical model. So the next model that we should talk about is what's called the Enslie's model. Now the Enslie's model is actually kind of interesting because it's almost the same as the theoretical model, except it's much more simplified. The theoretical model is kind of abstract, right? And so it's hard to talk about without making it sound like a thesis paper, at least in small conversations like you and I are having here. The Enslie's model simplifies things. It's actually one of the criticisms of the Enslie's model that might be overly simplified. And so people have a modified version of the Enslie's model or some other revision, which again, just complicates things. I think it's easier just to simplify things and go amongst terms that we can all talk about in a basic conversation. So the Enslie's model puts things into three stages. First stage is what's called perception. Perception is nothing but an observation or understanding of the status, attributes, or dynamics of a particular object. Okay? The status, the dynamics, or the attributes of a particular object. Okay? So you're just observing. That's it. You're just looking at something in the state of what it is. That's it. The second stage is what's called comprehension. Comprehension is seeking pattern, right? You're looking for pattern recognition and you're doing a little bit of interpretation to have a greater evaluation of that particular object. More importantly, the comprehension stage asks a particular question, which is, how does that cue, what does that object immediately affect in my overall objective or goal? Okay? How does that object or that event or whatever you're observing, how does that immediately affect my goal or objective? And so, you know, it's gone from not just observing something, but how does that observation now impact me right this second? Okay? And then the third stage in the Enslie's model is what's called projection. Projection is being able to predict the future behavior of that object or that event based on the development of pattern recognition. Okay? So if we take a look at those three stages and put this back into regular everyday life, let's not even talk about self-defense for a second here. If I want to cross the road, okay, and I come to the crosswalk and I look left, right, left, like we're taught to ever since we were kids, the first thing that I need is perception, right? I need to understand what an object is. So I see that car that's crossing my path, okay? I'm looking at it, the color, the size, if it's moving, what's the movement, that kind of thing, all right? And so we're just observing it being there. Then we go into the comprehension stage where we're looking for patterns. It seems like every car that's in that lane is going from my left to my right. Maybe it's a one-way road. They're all crossing this way, okay, left to right. And so now we're looking for pattern recognition, all right? And so we graduate into the projection stage. Now, based off of what I know, there's a car over there and it looks like this particular lane, all the traffic is going from my left to my right. I can predict that every car that's in that lane is now going to go from my left to my right. And how does that affect my immediate goal? I want to cross the street, okay? And so now I have to kind of remaneuver or wait for my opportunity or time and that kind of stuff, okay? And so the real important part about the Enslie's model, I think that differentiates it from all of the other ones, is that it's really the first one that allows for outside factors as an influence, okay? So, you know, if we go back to how I opened this particular episode and we talk about environmental awareness, situational awareness, and then self-awareness, it allows for those particular factors, whereas the theoretical does not, okay? I don't want to say it does not, it just doesn't do it so implicitly. The Enslie's model implies self-awareness or situational awareness as an individual or as a group, and then it has a whole bunch of dynamics that kind of fit within it. So, you know, certainly worth looking at. The fourth one, or the next one I should say, that I want to talk about is the Cooper color code. Okay, the Cooper color code, you guys might have heard this before. I think it's a really important one because essentially what it's doing is simplifying even more. It's taking a state of mental readiness and applying a color to it, okay? Just like an alarm, code red, code blue, any of those kinds of things, right? And so the Cooper color code does the same thing. The first color that it mentions is white. White is oblivious, unaware, okay? And that happens a lot today, right? Because we are too busy looking down on our phones or talking on the phone or checking Instagram or any of those types of things. And we're unaware of all of the dynamics that are happening around us, okay? So you're oblivious to that car coming. You're oblivious to that guy who's watching you from the other side of the parking lot or whatever. You're just oblivious to it because you've taken your resources and you've applied it to your phone rather than actual awareness or mental readiness of what's happening around you. The second color is the yellow color. Yellow is aware, right? Perfectly calm state, but our head's kind of on a swivel. We're taking a look around. We're seeing what's happening around us. We're observing different things. It may not be always looking for something bad, but it's just looking at what's happening, right? We're trying to understand the totality of the situation. The third one is orange. Orange is alert. Alert means that something is indicated that there's a potential threat ahead of us, okay? Maybe somebody's looking at you and you've observed that particular person. Maybe you're talking about, you know, the light turned green, and because it turned green, you know now to not cross the street. That kind of stuff, right? And so orange is all about alertness, okay? And then the fourth one is red. Red means alarm. It's happening right now. There's a reason why every fire alarm is red, why every fire extinguisher is red, okay? It's an immediate action, all right? It requires an immediate action. And so the red stage is, you're in the middle of it now, okay? And then there's a fifth one that often gets kind of, it goes one of two ways. That's the black stage. The black stage is engage or panic, okay? Engage means obviously to take some particular action. Panic is the degradation of your physical and your mental capabilities. Right? Your performance goes down big time, obviously, under panic. What's the variable in black? I think the variable is obviously training and readiness in the previous stages. Okay? If you had a good yellow, then you can go from yellow to orange to red. If you're stuck in white, typically you go straight from white to black, which is in the panic, right? Because it happens, you didn't see it coming, you weren't able to change anything, and now you're behind the power curve on this thing. And so, having those stages in between really makes a big difference. Now, if you take a look at any of these things, whether you're talking about the way I break it down, environmental, situational, and self-awareness, or you're talking about the theoretical model, you're talking about the OODA loop, you're talking about, Enslie's, all of these really come back down to the same thing. Remember what I said in the beginning, I don't like the term awareness. It doesn't imply anything. It doesn't tell, how do you aware, right? When we say cognitive readiness or cognitive engagement or mental readiness or mental engagement, what you're implying is that you're processing information differently. You're not looking, you're observing. And if you take a look at the definitions, and any of you guys feel free to find any of these things online, Google it, Wikipedia it, whatever you want to do, you'll realize that the operating word in all of these things is observe. Okay, you have to observe. Get away from the look. Observe. Okay, actually take information, apply your mental resources to sort that information constantly. Remember what I said also, at first when you're doing it, if you're not used to doing it, it becomes a little bit exhausting for you. But once you start to develop that habit, right, conscious effort for subconscious behavior, you'll realize how much easier it gets. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about a few pro tips, okay? Some things that maybe I do for myself that I think will help you out as well. First of all, based on what we know so far, we know that awareness is all about being mentally readily available at any given point in time, right? And applying that mental processing power at a greater level than what we normally do. That doesn't mean you have to go through life in a state, orange or red. It means you have to at least have your head on a swivel and cognitively pay attention to what's happening around you, right? Here's a few examples for you. When I go out to dinner with some friends or I sit around, one of the things that you'll find, actually, even when I'm filming this, you'll find that sometimes I'm looking at the camera, sometimes I'm looking at my notes in the laptop, sometimes I'm, paying attention to whatever's happening else in the room or listening for the elevator to go off or checking the door for the stairs or any of that stuff. It's not that I'm not paying attention. It's that I'm habitually used to being able to provide you with as many resources, with these tasks with X amount of resources, and then that leaves me resources to apply other places, okay? If you have $100, all right? If you have $100, you can spend that $100 however you want to. You could put all 100 into one place or a different place, or you could split it 60-40 or 50-50 or 75-25, however you want to, okay? But if you only have $100, you have $100 to work with. You can't magically come up with 101, 110, 120, whatever. Okay, so essentially you only have so many of those millions of neurosynaptic processes on how to process information. Now you could develop skill set to try and make those more efficient, but you still have the same amount. And so how you allocate those is up to you. And so through training and development and conscious effort to build a subconscious behavior, you'll find that it's easier to allocate fewer to one task so that way you can have more for a different task, all right? And that's kind of how I kind of go through a lot of these types of things. If you and I ever went out to dinner and sat down for coffee or whatever, you're going to realize that one of the things that I'm doing is constantly looking around, but I'm still engaged in that conversation. I haven't tuned you out. I'm still responding coherently, hopefully. I'm still responding. I'm still engaging the conversation, but at the same time, I'm also looking around, looking at the exits, the entrances, the people that are walking in and out, what's happening with the staff, those kinds of things. And so, I choose to allocate particular resources in a particular manner. Okay. So here's another pro tip for you guys. I want you guys, this is really helpful for those of you guys who are getting started in this. One of the things that I do for myself is quadrant. I look at everything in a quadrant. When I say quadrant, I mean literally 4 spaces, okay? Up and down line, horizontal line, okay? I break everything down into 4 spaces. It's almost categoric for me, okay? And then when we work with law enforcement, there's a common terminology. It's hips, hands, and demeanor. Hips, hands, and demeanor means look at somebody's waistline to see if there's anything around it. That'll lead you up to their hands to see if they're holding a gun, a knife, a bottle, you know, any of that stuff. And then look at their overall behavior, right? So hips, hand, and demeanor. And by breaking things down in a quadrant, what I can do is go from my lower left corner to my lower right, and then up to my top right to my top left. So I kind of scan through all 4 of these quadrants constantly. Sometimes I reverse it depending on the situation or what I need, or what my vantage point is. But by breaking down everything in a quadrant, what we're doing is we are giving it a much more consumable and manageable amount of information. So now, rather than seeing the big picture, I can see small pictures. And by doing small pictures, I can more efficiently get through that information, process it, and see if there's a indication of a threat, okay? And so the quadrant theory is something that, the quadrant method, I should say, is something that I think is extremely important on how to view the world, because it gives you a process on how to view things on a picture in, picture out basis, right? And so we can discard what we need to, not discard stuff because our brain's trained to. Observe in those 4 quadrants. Rinse and repeat, okay? One of the ways that you guys do that is literally mentally superimpose the X and Y axis. Break it down for yourself, okay? Look at that picture clearly and observe what's going on inside of that, okay? One of the other things that I do is I constantly recognize exits, entries. I look for unknown exits and entries, okay? So, I'm looking for places that crowds will go to, which means that maybe I can go to somewhere else. I'm looking for places that I can barricade possibly. I'm looking for, weaponry that I could possibly improvise in case if I don't have any, right? And so by, again, going through that quadrant type of deal, not only do I see everything that's happening with the people, but I also see the environment that way. I also see the situation that way, and then obviously that will directly impact my self-awareness. So having that particular quadrant gives me a little bit more usage, some more mileage out of my awareness, okay? And as you're doing so, one of the questions that I think is not asked enough is, what in this particular picture does not belong? Earlier in the episode, I said, if we're having this conversation, for you to see a camera or a laptop or any of that stuff is perfectly normal. If I put an elephant behind me, you're gonna be like, that doesn't belong there, okay? And so, although that's kind of an extreme example, but it's basically the same thing. Look for the white elephant in the room, the thing that doesn't belong, all right? Look for something that is indicating that there's maybe some nefarious potential threats nearby. Okay? And the biggest part of it is be deliberate with that input, okay? Be purposeful with how you're processing that information. So here's a few different examples I think are worthy of talking about here, okay? Criminal intent is predicated on the probability of success. I'll repeat that for you. Criminal intent is predicated on the probability of success. Okay, so criminals aren't as dumb as people think. They have their own process, their own OODA loop, their own color code system that they go through. Here's a couple examples for you. If you take a look at 2 people who are walking out of the store, just imagine this. If you take a look at 2 people who are walking out of the store just a few feet apart from each other. One person is looking up, they're scanning through the parking lot, they're looking at cars going by, they're doing all of that stuff. Their head's on a swivel, right? They're observing, they're pretty aware. And then right behind them is another person who's face down into their phone, looking at Instagram. They're bumping into people. They're not quite sure what lane they parked their car in. If you were a criminal, who would you rather attack? The person who's making eye contact and looking around and being observant, or the person who's got their head down and buried in the phone? Okay. Obviously, the second person is the easier victim, and so that criminal is going to target that kind of a person first. Okay. Why? Because criminals are a lot like electricity. They're looking for the path of least resistance, right? Again, it's about the probability of success. Okay. Coming home, here's something that I do for myself as well. When I start to come into my neighborhood, when I turn onto my street, I immediately start looking at different homes. And in between yards, I'm looking for people who are running through one yard to the other or scuttling from one place to the other. I'm just looking for something that seems off. Remember what I said, look for the white elephant in the room. And so I'm looking for things that go off. And as I start to approach my home, I start to look at my home in the same eyes. I start to see, is the garage door open? Did I leave it open? Are the lights on? Are the lights off? Do I see any broken glass? Is there somebody who's around it? What's going on over here, right? And so, I start to observe from further away. And again, go back to Enslie's theory or the theoretical model, and you see how the process is still building the same way, okay? And one of the things that I think that people dismiss is that, or one of the mistakes they make is that, look, our homes are our sanctuaries. We feel safe in our homes, okay? And so when we get there, we're kind of like, okay, no more traffic problems. I don't have to worry about somebody trying to rob me or any of that stuff. But bad things happen at home just as often as they happen anywhere else. And so try to observe those early on, right? And then when I walk home, the first thing I do is I always walk the first floor and I look for doors that have been opened, windows that might be broken, lights that are on or off, something that's disturbed, any of that kind of stuff. What I'm looking for is, again, something that just doesn't fit. I'm looking for cues. I'm observing the cues to see that there's a potential hazard or if there's not, okay? By the way, you could stop, a bad leak from turning into a flood going through the same process, right? And so it's not always about self-defense. Awareness applies everywhere, all right? If you guys are going to a restaurant, here's some stuff to think about too. Where are you sitting? Some people sit really close to the exit because they're like, look, I want to be one of the first ones out. I tend to sit more further away from the exit because it buys me a reactionary time and a reactionary distance. I kind of feel like if somebody's going to come in blasting through the door, I don't want to be the first one hit. And so, I tend to sit far away, tend to be in corners with my back to a wall, so that way I don't have to worry about 180 degrees behind me. I tend to see everything kind of forward. I always grab a seat when I'm facing the door, so that way I can see who's coming in, who's coming out, and be able to pick that up as well. One of the things that you guys will notice if we ever go out to dinner is that right away, I will go to the bathroom. I'll excuse myself and go to the restroom. It has nothing to do with going to the restroom. I want to get used to the lay of the land. I look at the floor plan, and as I go to the bathroom, I also look for unknown exits and entries, okay? And so all I'm doing is just gathering information. I'm making observations, making a mental note just in case, okay? So that's something that you guys can take a look at. And in doing so, you can now start thinking about what's an alternate escape, what's an alternate barricade area, how do I make a stronghold, how do I get the hell out of here real quick, how do I throw somebody out of here real quick in case of a fire, in case of a flood, in case of an active shooting. It's all the same thing. I still got to get out of the building. And so, I think between all those kinds of examples, it should be pretty evident on how awareness is really about mental readiness and constant decision making. One of the books that I would highly recommend for everybody to read is a book by Gavin de Becker called The Gift of Fear. Now, The Gift of Fear is more written for women interested in self-defense, but I think there's lessons to be learned for everybody straight across the board. You could find this audiobook, you could find them on Amazon real cheap, or Borders or Barnes & Noble. It's a really simple read, it's a thin book, but it's a great book. And inside of the book, the overall point of it is that, you have to pay attention to your instincts. And it has dozens of stories and testimonials from women who've survived violent encounters. And one of the first things that every single one of them says is, I wish I paid attention to this. I wish I recognized that. I wish I followed this particular instinct. I wish I gave a little bit more energy into thinking about that. And so they give all of these different examples in their own lives. And again, these are women who have survived violent encounters, who are telling you that the very heart of it, that they could have prevented pretty much all of them had they had a little bit more understanding about what actual awareness is, meaning mental readiness, and applied it, right? They allocated a little bit more resources to it. And so, I think it's really important for people to not just hear different studies that I've listed out or my interpretations of it, or even some of my quote unquote pro tips, but I think it's important to understand and hear from the people who've actually survived some heinous violent encounters, for them to turn around and immediately say, I wish I had a little bit more attention on fill in the blank, is huge. That's a profound statement when every single one of them starts their story with, I wish I had allocated more resources to this. And so, great book, really simple read. I'd highly recommend that everybody gets their hands on it and goes through it, right? So I think between all of this stuff, I think you guys have a lot of information, right? We've gone through a bunch of different studies. You got the books, you got my pro tips. We've defined and redefined what awareness is. And I think that if you start to spend a little bit of time, let me give you a 5-day exercise, okay? 3 days of it is of an exercise, 2 days is kind of a debrief. And this gets a little bit dark at times, but I want you guys to do this. And I guarantee you that if you do this, you will never see the world in the same light. I'm not saying better or worse, but if you do this, you're just gonna see it differently. So here's what I want you to do. Day one, I want you to go through the entire day, go everywhere you go, to the store, to work, to the school, to pick up the kids. It doesn't make a difference. Everywhere you go, I want you to go through with a predatory mindset, as if you're the bad guy, right? Trying to find the target, trying to inflict harm, somebody with criminal intent. I want you to go through the entire, now please don't take action on this. I just want you to go through and see what they see, right? Think like a criminal for a second. Go through the entire day, all of it, with criminal intent, okay? And log it. I want you to make a journal real fast and say, I would have done this to this person. Here's why, here's how, here's where, all that stuff, right? Just some brief notes. That's day one. Day two, I want you to go through the hunt mindset. When I say the hunt mindset, imagine yourself to be a police officer, detective, special operations, any of that stuff. Somebody who's looking for bad people, right? Somebody who goes into a potentially semi-hostile environment and they know that there's potential threats hidden amongst the people and hiding in the corners. How do I find it? I want you to go through your day number 2 in the hunt mindset. Okay, so day 1, be a predator. Day 2, be a hunter. And then obviously make your notes on that, right? Day number 3, I want you to be the target. Now knowing or having some understanding of what the criminal is looking for and what the hunter is looking for, how would that person, that criminal, get their hands on you? Whether they want to rob you, kill you, assault you, whatever. Okay, and I want you to log every single one of those particular events. This would happen in the parking lot, at the school, at work. I came out, I parked in a dark spot, any of those types of things. I want you to go through day 3 thinking about how many different ways you could have gotten attacked. Okay? So day 1, predatory. Day 2, hunter. Day 3, target. Okay? And so that brings you to day 4 and day 5. Day 4 and day 5 is a reflection on the first 3 days. You're going to go through those notes that you made through your journal entries or however you logged it. And I want you to process those things mentally and emotionally. And I want you to ask yourself a particular question. How would I have handled that situation? Okay, you're a victim to all of it, or you're a target for all of it, let's just say. How would I have protected myself? What are my capabilities? Where are my pitfalls? What are the vulnerabilities? I want you to list it out, pros and cons, A and B, however you guys want to do it. I want you to list this out, okay? And once you list it out in black and white, that means you're processing information, you're writing it down. Take some time to go through this and really absorb it and be honest with yourself. Too many people think that, hey, just because I got a gun, I can do this. And just because I'm a martial artist, I can do that. Just because I'm fat, nobody's going to pick on me or any of that stuff. Quit making excuses. Start being honest with yourself, okay? And that was really one of the points of the last episode, right? Because I told you about my friend, or at least the friend that I made at the gym, who was in a wheelchair, right? And I took her out of the wheelchair and dumped her onto the floor, and we started teaching self-defense. Why did I do that with her? Because I know that the predator is going to knock her out of the wheelchair, okay? So that's your 5-day exercise. And I know it gets a little bit dark at times, well worthy of doing it. Day 1, predatory. Day 2, hunter. Day 3, target. Day 4 and Day 5, debrief and reflection. Okay. All right, so now you have tons of information. You got some drills and exercises. You got some pro tips from me. Superimpose that quadrant thing. I promise you, that's a great way of going about it. If you don't want to go to the quadrants, be like a old 1980s television, right? And have like this scanning method, bottom left corner to right, and then kind of work your way up, work your way up, work your way up, and then recycle. To me, that's a little bit overwhelming. I like the quadrant method, but whatever works for you. But I really want you to, how do you look at every single day, every single situation, every single moment? Break that down into small consumable information, observe it, process it, discard what you need to, take mental notes of the stuff that you don't need to, okay? And so, yeah, a lot of information. I enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully you guys did too. I hope you guys learned something out of this. And if you guys found this one to be valuable, please do me a favor. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, comment below what you guys liked, what you didn't like. If you have any other additional tips that you'd like to add to the conversation, I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys. And share this video as often as you possibly can to as many people as you possibly can, especially for your loved ones, right? If you have somebody who kind of goes through life with their, head down, maybe it's your teenage kids, or maybe it's your spouse or any of that stuff, give this to them. Maybe they'll find some use out of it, right? We go through our entire lives acting like nothing's happening around us, and yet we turn on the news and we find out that there's bad things happening around us all day long. And so let's make a conscious effort to develop a better subconscious behavior. All right, guys, with that, I will leave you alone. Next week, Monday, episode 003, we are going to get into the dynamics of violent encounters and how to prepare for those, okay? And that's going to be an important one because it is one of those topics that will certainly make you think twice about what you can and cannot do. It's going to have some self-awareness to it for sure, okay? So tune in for that. I'll be posting that up on Monday next week. I got some guests coming on for some other ones that I think you guys want to tune into, so make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, comment, and hit the notifications bell so every time one of these goes up, you guys don't miss an episode. Okay, be safe, be well, and I will see you guys on the next one. Thank you for tuning in.